Hello and welcome to our first of the series of the videos related to CIMA paper E3 enterprise strategy within CIMA syllabus. The Express videos are all based on the Express notes, which you can see now in front of you, and you can also download them from the website www.theexpgroup.com. Now, our first video will be devoted to the responsible business practices, a concept which has gained a lot of interest and a lot of importance over the past years. Now, responsible business practices we will be talking about within the area of the first chapter of the notes, which is about external factors affecting the organizational strategy. Now, before an organization starts developing its detailed strategy, so where the organization wants to be, how it wants to contribute to the overall well-being of the community in which it operates, first, there are some perhaps limitations, perhaps opportunities, information pieces which have to be collected from its external environment. And now we will look at some of them, namely the first of them and the subject of this video, responsible business practices. As I said, this has been a very fashionable term over the last few years, maybe more than few. Generally, it relates to something that economists would call externalities. So basically, any organization and here we're talking about businesses, obviously, operates by, well, let's say, buying some inputs and selling the outputs. Now, the problem on that way is that these are not the only relationships with the environment. There is a number of others. By doing the buying and selling thing, it generates the profit, which is good, which is what the shareholders want. But the question is, how much does it really cost us to get that profit? Are all the costs included here? Or maybe there are some other costs that are generated on that way. And obviously you can imagine that there will be some waste generated, so dangerous for environment. The first thing associated with the responsible business practices, that's all obviously minus. There could be some dangerous work practices, say child or slave labor. Now, it did contribute to making that profit, obviously, but is this something that we really want? And basically, should the consumers know about it? There may be some pluses, obviously, as well. Jobs created. Right? There may be some community contributions. Another plus. So there is a number of those externalities which should be taken into account, right? We do make a profit, and that is our objective as a business entity. But how much does this profit cost us, and what do we want this profit to cost us? What do we accept as an organization in terms of that profit generating costs within our strategy? So responsible business practices will reflect on the actual business impacts, risks, and opportunities, because there can be opportunities as well. We need to do inclusive management process. The management process that includes all the externalities. We have to monitor them. We have to take care about them if we want to do the business responsibly. Now, we need to take into account the requirements of all of our stakeholders, not only the shareholders, whom we might assume would only like more profit. No, this time, within the responsible business practices framework, we need to take into account also the other ones, which we will discuss later. And we need to be transparent in terms of what we're doing. There's a number of operations, number of activities which we cannot perform without generating waste. Right? Everyone wants to drive a car, but it does generate waste when manufactured and then when driven. It just does. Right? We can take care to minimize its impact, and we can be transparent about how that waste is generated, how much that waste is generated, and what we do to minimize it. Now, practical point of view, responsible business practices, which is part of the syllabus for this paper, is a very broad term. It can be associated with other terms which you probably are aware of. Obviously, we will have the environmental issues involved. We will have community issues involved, workplace practices, business conduct, and ethics. Now, just to give you an indicator of companies that had problems in the past, in the notes you've got Gap. The problem that Gap had was that one of its suppliers, so it wasn't really Gap, it was just Gap using a supplier in one of the ex-Soviet republics, and they basically manufactured cotton fiber. And it turned out some journalists discovered that there were children employed in that factory. So can you imagine Gap clothes, usually very expensive, being manufactured with the use of child labor? That is unacceptable to Gap clients, to Gap shareholders, and Gap took an immediate action to counteract that. The way multinationals do it is they impose strict regulations on their suppliers in order to avoid problems like these, because the problems generated by suppliers can significantly impact on the reputation of those companies. A similar case with Nike, where Nike shoes turned out to be manufactured by Chinese prisoners in one of the factories. That was unacceptable to Nike consumers in Europe, and that obviously changed. Now, responsible business practices is an overarching term, as we discussed, and within that term there will be corporate social responsibility. The CSR, you probably know about it. Many of your companies probably produce corporate social responsibility reports, and that is a report which describes how the entity impacts on the environment and what it does to minimize its negative impacts. There can be the ESG reports, environmental, social, and governance related. That is usually for investment industry. And they also tend to explain to their members how they make decisions about investments that they take, because investment entities also have the social responsibility problem. They want to convince the people who give them money that they would never invest in unethical businesses or businesses engaged in inappropriate work practices. Another term associated with responsible business practices is triple bottom line. So basically the bottom line, obviously meaning the profit. That's the accounting abbreviation or the accounting phrase for a profit, but usually profit is only an economic concept. Now the social and environmental parameters are added. Obviously the term of sustainability is within the responsible business practices. So sustainable development is the development which can last for ages. So we do not overexploit certain resources just because we want to make a quick profit. Global citizenship is the awareness of corporate social responsibility. We are a global citizen, meaning we do not prefer the inhabitants of certain countries by overexploiting the inhabitants of other countries. And finally, my favorite term, enlightened self-interest. Again, what it's trying to say is that businesses do everything in their self-interest. That's obvious. However, they are enlightened to know that the business must be sustainable, and that's a true self-interest then.